Hi, everybody. I'm Adriana Hopkins with 7 News DC, coming to you from the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. This week, we're taking a look at some of the events PGC MLS is hosting in celebration of Hispanic heritage. And trust me, there's a little something for everyone. Monday at 7 p.m., join PGC MLS in conversation with C.T. Salazar. Salazar is a Latinx poet and librarian from Mississippi. He is also the 2020 recipient of the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Award in Poetry. Celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month at the South Bowie Branch Library this Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. with a fun traditional craft. Kids will learn all about and create their own version of a mola, a traditional folk art fabric created by the women of the Kuna tribe in Panama. Let's paint like Frida at the New Carrollton Branch Library. Children ages 8 to 12 are invited to learn about Mexican artist Frida Kahlo and make their own self-portraits. Canvases, paintbrushes, and paint will all be provided. So get ready to get artsy this Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. Wednesday evenings at 6:30 throughout Hispanic Heritage Month, PGC MLS is having multiple fun special guest events all over the county. Check out pgcmls.info/Hispanic-heritage for an up-to-date listing of all the events you won't want to miss out on. Here is one of those events for this week at the Greenbelt Branch Library. Is anyone up for an evening of Latin dance? Learn about the origins of Hispanic heritage celebrations in this country, as well as some facts about the history of Latin dances. And do be sure to bring your dancing shoes because everyone will have a chance to try out some fun Latin dance steps. Thursday at 7 p.m., join PGC MLS and the College Park Aviation Museum for Latinas in Aviation. They'll be speaking with Captain Linda Powles on her book, Beyond Haiku, Pilots Write Poetry. Are you or a family member looking for digital magazines in Spanish written specifically for Spanish-speaking readers? Well, Overdrive has a fantastic collection of newsstand, specialty, and hobbyist periodicals ready for you. Be sure to follow PGC MLS on social media for all the things happening at your local library. Have a great week. We'll see you back here next week.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I am Kyla Hannington with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, and it is my pleasure to be joining with our friends, the Prince George's County Memorial Library System, and Nick Brown, the CEO of Outreach and Communication, who's with me today, as we talk to amazing poet C.T. Salazar. He is a Latinx poet and librarian from Mississippi, whose debut collection, Headless, John the Baptist Hitchhiking, is forthcoming in 2020 from Acre Books. He's the author of 3 chapbooks, most recently this one, American Cavewall Sonnets, and he's the 2020 recipient of the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Award in Poetry. His poems have appeared in the Rumpus, Cincinnati Review, 32 Poems, Reiner, and elsewhere. And it is my absolute pleasure to be with both of you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kyla.
Thanks, Kyla. And welcome, CT. We're so jazzed for this conversation. We've had it planned for like 9 months, and we're really grateful to you for being willing to join us. And, you're someone who has 2 lives, which I'm sure connect, both in libraries and then as a creator. And Kyla and I share that kind of life too, with multiple roles going on at one time. And thank you for fitting us in because I know you've got a lot going on. So. Would you be willing to kick us off with a bit of a reading of something that you feel like sharing with us, or would you rather just jump into questions?
No, I'd be happy to read.
Great.
Yeah, can do. I'll read just a few.
Okay, CT, I think we might be losing a little bit. Can you hear us okay?
Love you. Though over and over you enter its wide mouth like Jonah passing back and forth through the fish. Even with 4 horses and a loft full of crows, the barn is of no mind. The smoke above the barn is just the sky remembering the barn. Say it. Say the flame inside is just the barn pretending to be a man. The next time you put faith in anything, remember, when the wind blows, the barn sings till it runs out of breath. And so this poem is called Poem with the Head of Homer in it. The list of relics is long, and I want to find everything I've lost. I understand we're constantly losing things, and this makes them valuable. The bones of St. Peter, didn't you know, were found recently. Peter knew where they were, of course, but the wisdom of the dead is mostly lost on us, good only for gathering dust. Somewhere still exist the remains of people who may or may not love us today if they could. The world withering. If Homer was real, he loved wine. He would have loved me in all of my flightless magnificence. If Homer was blind, all those marble sculptures of his face could see as much as he could. This makes him the perfect subject. Are you still with me? What if I've lost my way? Stumbled into this coffin called home. This may or may not be my country. The American dream and me have little in common. We will both be dead in no time. Relics someone might find if they dig. The marble head of Homer probably doesn't remember its home or its body. Forgetting is a kind of mercy. Eventually, even the cemetery forgets it is a cemetery and looks like an open field. One Homer would have loved for a battlefield. One Odysseus could ask his son to carry him across. There's more than one kind of battle. I tell myself these things as if it'll stop me turning to stone, my country cracking me. Imagine me buried in a cemetery that forgets it's a cemetery. Relics in a field, my belt buckle, my father's watch, his name engraved on it. And I'll read another one real quick. This one actually isn't in my full-length collection. It's not in any manuscript, but it's one that my alma mater asked me to write when they raised the new Mississippi flag.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm excited. Thank you.
Oh, no. So it's not one that I get to read a lot because it doesn't really have a manuscript home, but I do like reading it. It's called Everyone I Love is a Stitch in a New Flag, or a poem in which I use the word hope for the first time. And already you're wondering where in my mouth a word like that would dare be born, when so often I've seen Mississippi twist to snakes in our hands. Listen, a long time a man lit something he loved and saw a flag. This was only the beginning. A long time ago, the belly of the beast learned its name, Mississippi. Mississippi, how do you love a place only temporarily satisfied with its fill of blood? There is no magic trick. All of those people who disappeared are dead. I am told the killers were God-fearing. Mississippi, do you regret all those times you were a cage to your own? I only ask you because I'm still trying to ask myself without this guilty feeling. How dare you think helping hand and not bring a hammer? How dare you imagine paradise as past tense? I came all this way to tell you, if I ever love a flag more than my neighbor's freedom, burn me alive. I came all this way with the defiant thought that we can keep each other alive. For a lack of better words, we are raising a new flag. And because this is a love poem, I have to tell you about the stars and the river and how they are trying so hard to gleam like the children will raise under this new flag. And because this isn't a history book, I have to tell you about everyone who died before this happened and how painfully. If I were better, it wouldn't have taken me this long to realize hope isn't the word I need to give you at all. It's heal or help or hold. Hold on to the belief we had when we made a new flag, that somewhere in the future there's a Mississippi where we don't kill each other, that our children don't see shame when they look at us, though we have it, that we can tell them, even if we did this for you, we did it for us too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That poem, I mean, I was very fortunate, for those who are watching who don't know me personally, I was very fortunate that I was able to see that poem previously. Actually, CT, I brought a prop.
Oh,
I have a prop here. Are you ready?
Ready?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I brought my MEW sweatshirt for Mississippi University for Women, and that's who asked you to do that poem, correct?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you, I mean, there's so much I want to talk to you about, but because that was the poem you just read, is, you know, you're from Mississippi, and we see Mississippi in so much of your writing, and that has had me just thinking about how geography shapes us and shapes work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, for sure. For a long time, I was actually very resistant to the idea of calling myself a Southern writer. And I think that's because the Southern writing tropes that I knew were very white writing tropes. And then it honestly wasn't until early MFA grad school when I read C.D. Wright for the first time. And then I saw how actually strange and askewed Southern writing can be. And then I found her work and a work of other writers like her that helped me be more comfortable with kind of owning the identity of a Southern writer. But then specifically with Mississippi, it seriously is in everything that I do. And I've been to a lot of other places in the country, but I think that a really unique factor of Mississippi is how we're not living in a very linear form of history here. You know, we have structures, houses, government systems that are still very much firmly rooted in the past. So I think that a lot of Mississippi writers that I've read too are actively writing about a multiplicity of time, that they're writing about the past, the present, and then also wanting to imagine the future. I hope that answers your question.
No, that's great. Thank you.
So, sorry to jump away from Mississippi, but there's something that's like mind-blowing to me in your work, and I've gathered from different bits and types of your work, from the recent chapbooks to some of the other separately published works, and then even some of your one of your talks on nuclear things in relation to poetry. And at least from my reading of your work, I find a discussion of, and correct me if I'm wrong, the kind of in-between space. Not, you know, the physical expression of our beings is a big part of your work, but you're kind of framing it in the, you know, there's a before and the after, and the relation to nature and the cosmos even is so much greater than our physical being at any given point in time, even though there's a lot of physical things that inform our identity. Is that something that you're doing intentionally, or is that just my own reading of some of your work? And I'm thinking specifically a lot about the 40 Stitches, and then I heard in one of the other excerpts that you shared right now, some of the same themes are coming into play, like the Father's Watch, for example.
Yeah, no, that's exactly like nail on the head. I'm a really big reader of two non-poetry writers, Judith Butler and Arundhati Roy, and they both write a lot about all the contentions of self and the environment. And I was always interested in that, but it wasn't until probably finding their work about 3 years ago that I at least gained the language for it, of that we're actively interdependent on an entire ecology. So I started trying to think, like, well, if poems had ecologies, how is everything connected in a single poem or a group of poems? And, you know, what's the ecology of the self and anyone else I write in my poems, and what's the ecology of the entire world that takes place inside of any verse? So yeah, no, that's a great reading of it, because that's very specific.
Yeah. Well, one thing too that really struck me is this line from your remarks on nuclearization and poetry and such and humanity. You said, quote, "Imagination is the pivotal moment of confrontation," and that is in every line and every kind of pairing of words, and in the way that words connect with each other across pages and across different episodes of your works. I'd never heard that concept worded that way, but it was really interesting to me. And I think you in your work are kind of making some of these existential themes relatable to our daily inner thinking and inner dialogue, just as regular humans. And I haven't read much poetry that has been that powerful in such a concise amount of space. So not a question, just comment. Thank you.
Deeply honored to hear you say that. Do you guys want me to read some more, or what do you?
Oh,
sure.
We would
Always.
love that. Yeah.
You tell me. I want to like steer the conversation. If it's okay with you, I'll read just a few from the American Cavewall Sonnets.
Oh, that would be fantastic. This is all.
So just to give a little background context too, American Cavewall Sonnets was published in February. Most of the sonnets themselves were written in 2017 and 2018, and they're a cycle of 21 sonnets. There was originally more, but several of them, like for various reasons, didn't make the book itself. American Cavewall Sonnet. The fires my father started, O Lord. Once he found a sleeping bear and named him Ramesses. I am the bowl he cries in at night when the body is too simple to break into meaningful music or have like fruit after a sharp knife. His jaw where I look for the mountains gone, under his tongue the names of sleeping stars wake. For God so loved the world, he sobbed angels and circus animals as it starved. And he named these misplaced creatures fathers. My father was always talking in his sleep. Baby boy, the hurt I've brought others will visit you soon, as a beggar limping. American Cavewall Sonnet. The fountain clogged with plague frogs and our hair went unwashed. I said no, because you asked if prayer worked. A hammer works. A man. I know none of this sounds like an apology, but bear with me. The sunflower field was so dazzling, I missed the funeral. The truck wouldn't start. Here's a country of statues crushed under the weight of migrating ladybugs. If men could, they would melt other men down to gold. Mercy, you said, as if the fire blew itself out, as if the town's missing children woke up in the silo unharmed. I'll just read one more of the American Cavewall Sonnets. I tried to mouth hope, but kept saying hatchet. Sing something to stay awake. Here's a song about our ancestors. They wore masks for fear of angels knowing their faces. They fastened sails to their boats. Paradise, mother says, hides behind old family photographs. The dark we hold but dare not open. Empty bird nest in the old barn. When I remember you, I remember the animal we built out of stray bones from the riverbed. The relic-rich ground, the half-buried horseshoe I tripped over. You say, shake the sun from your hair. I'll wear your pearls. All the trees of the field will clap their hands.
Thank you. These are. I'm sorry. Did you want to read more? Or was that the okay? No, those are just amazing. I didn't want to cut you off. They're so amazing. And the first one you read was one that I had made a note to ask you to read, actually. So thank you for getting there. And that takes us to a question. Nick and I were chatting, before this, and we both had a theme that comes up, and that first one, it particularly talks about it, this theme. We see the character of father throughout so much of your work in many different places. And can you talk about that, like the image of father that you have in your work?
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, the immediate relationship is that I have a really, I think, complex relationship to my dad, and it is a lovingly complex relationship. But beyond that, when I write, there's a lot that I really want to reconcile, especially in the American Cavewall Sonnets, with masculinity. And a lot of the sonnets kind of came from a place of just feeling like there was a kind of apocalypse of masculinity, and that, especially in like 17 and 18, I kind of turned to the sonnet as like a panic closet to like retreat into. And so a lot of my writing uses the idea of just father or manhood as a kind of critique to, it's difficult to find the right words for it, but just as a kind of carefulness around the various masculinities that like I as a person inhabit or can inhabit, and to be a little bit more intentional, to be more vulnerable in my living and in my writing.
Back in 40 Stitches, there was a moment where I felt like you connected that presence of father and that filter with the religious theme and the bell tolling as that persistent reminder. And for me, I went right to the watch, and a watch ticking kind of chained to the wrist, as is mentioned. And then a few pages later is that notion of the bell. And it's like these ever-present things that are weighing on us, even if there isn't a physical manifestation in that moment. Was that a connection that you intended, or is that just my making things up?
Yeah. In a big way, yeah. I think that when I write, there's especially like objects. There's a lot of objects that are, for whatever reason, emotionally heavy for me. And I think that with the full-length collection, especially the full-length book, Headless, John the Baptist, Hitchhiking, it's divided into 4 sections. And I think in each section, I have the exact same questions that I never really answer. And I think that it's kind of this, I think, restlessness that I approach that I can't, at least for right now, can't seem to shake. So it's, I definitely sometimes feel guilty of like writing about the same things over and over, but at least so far it's organic every time. So I'm glad that they come across as good connections instead of beating a reader over the head.
No, and I do want to go back and like talk about family, and talking about, you use the expression lovingly complex relationship with your father. And so I think this is the question that we all have as writers and as readers when we read people talking about family is, how do you negotiate that terrain of talking about or working through or working out a relationship that is complex on the page where, like, presumably your father may read it and feel exposed and you're exposed. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I try to have a negotiation with myself whenever I write, and to revise and edit very honestly, and to respect relationships, but still get to ground that's meaningful for me. And I think a big way for me in writing is to, as much as I can, not be a reductivist. And that when I write, whoever I'm writing about, I never want to say that they're one thing and one thing only. And even I'll do that a lot in drafts, and that's the first thing I edit out when I'm revising, is pinpointing moments where I specifically limit someone else in my writing. And I don't know, it's still a scary thing knowing that your family reads your own writing, but it's moments where I'm writing and I'm trying to be just as vulnerable with myself as a speaker. I never want to take advantage of an object or person in a poem, because that's just like taking advantage of someone in reality. Like everything that we build in language is directly connected to the world we live in. So I try as honestly as I can to keep those relationships open, and to, as a subject, not be a hero of my own poems.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
How do you balance your creative expression with the other part of your life of working in libraries, and knowing most creatives, like we exist, that's our identity, right? And we live in that brain space 24/7, except we have these other things that we have to do in life. So how do you kind of balance all of that in your day and in your mind?
I'm pretty good at like compartmentalizing. Like a big part of myself is like a librarian self, and I could talk just as lovingly about being a librarian as being a writer, because I absolutely love being a librarian. But I think that the tendencies crisscross. Like my love of librarianship is like the details of it, the tediousness, the indexing, the unending resources and lists. And a lot of my poetry just like will endlessly detail and list things. And I bug a lot of my writer friends by like sending them stuff constantly. So I'm like their personal little librarian. But I don't know. I try to think that they have positive impacts on each other. Like I think that a good librarian is very creative in their approach to tasks, and I think that like a good poet knows their sources and knows where to find what they need.
Cool.
I mean, we could talk more about libraries, because we are here with our friends, the Prince George's County Memorial Library System, who are fantastic for so many people all over, not just Prince George's County, but the region and Mississippi. Here we are. And so one of the things that I see, I get to do a lot of work with the library system, and fortunate to see their work kind of up close. And one of the things that I see is, what does it mean to be a resource in the community? And how does being a resource in the community impact and change and strengthen communities? And so I was wondering, for you, you're a librarian, you're at Delta State now, Delta State University, right? Is it university? College?
It's university, yeah.
University. How do you see your function as a librarian and the library system in general, and in creating that space?
Yeah, so my specific kind of library field has always been rural libraries. So I worked at a small public library in Lowndes County. That was the Columbus Lowndes Public Library. I say small. It was actually a pretty large library that had a lot of great resources. But the community is considered a rural community. And here in Cleveland, Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta, it's also rural. So to me, there's something that's just very community dependent on what a library can do, and the fact that, again, going back to ecology, it's the library is in a relationship of co-independence or interdependence. That everything that the library can do is directly because of its community. Everything that the community can accomplish is hopefully being helped by the library instead of hindered. Mm-hmm. But there's something that really just dazzling about the relationship of a rural library. Just like even like walking the stacks, when you go to that book collection and you check out a book, you're holding a same resource that someone else in your community has read. So you are all of the same mind in some way. You all have the same sources and information, and you're all taking part in the same reads together. And you may never meet the other people reading those books. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a form of, I don't know, like almost an inner spiritual relationship to your community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to throw out a question, and feel free to say you want to pass if you don't like it. But, I think, in a lot of these programs that we've had with Kyla, and especially with the Mississippi Connection, which has been awesome, we've been able to kind of explore some of the ways people in other regions of the country have like really strong conceptions of what culture is in the South and in places like Mississippi in particular and such. In libraries, I think the same kind of thing is applied to rural libraries. As you were just talking about, it's like it's a whole ecosystem in and of itself, even though it's part of the same overall picture. And one of the common stereotypes, misconceptions that I think might exist out there is, like, for example, challenges to books might only happen in conservative areas or might only happen in the Deep South. But in fact, there are challenges to intellectual freedom that happen in libraries of every type and every flavor and every size everywhere in this country. And there's certain titles that, for example, in Maryland are being challenged right now that you would be shocked to hear that they're being challenged here. But I think there's, I'm just speaking to hear your sense of that and, ways in which people in other regions of the country, and maybe even just thinking about libraries in that rural, suburban, urban kind of division that exists unnecessarily, is based in reality or not?
Wow, such a beautiful question. I think that there's a lot of divisions we make up, but I don't know. I think that especially when you're talking about like other situations, looking at Mississippi or looking at rural areas, I say this not wanting to let Mississippi off the hook for any of its past, but there's a lot of the country that has to reckon with the fact that it benefits historically from everything that happened in Mississippi. I always see like the South or rural areas being the villain, the bad guy, when in reality, I mean, Mississippi, Texas, it's full of Black and brown people who are just gerrymandered out of any representation, and they're not the bad guy at all.
Mm-hmm.
So this may not actually connect back to libraries, but at least it does to me, because that's my best perspective into the communities I work with, or the communities that I live in. But I think the divisions become real because we're so dependent that they exist.
That is artfully stated.
Mm-hmm.
It's we've been getting to similar, to applying that to some of our other work, especially on the human rights and race and social equity side. We as a species have this compulsion for labeling and like assigning ourselves to tribes essentially with the labeling or othering people with those labels, and it completely blocks what, in my opinion, personally, as an individual human, not on behalf of my employer, is the most important thing, which is that we all share some fundamental differences. Mm-hmm. Some fundamental similarities. And of course, there are always going to be differences. And like I've been doing some traveling this year, and I've been going to places where I had really strong preconceptions of what my experience would be like and how I had to comport myself in order to protect myself for one identity or another that I carry. And while I saw some evidence of some of the things that are some of those systemic issues, I was completely blown away, and I was able to form connections with people instantly who I entered those situations with preconceptions that I saw obliterated pretty quickly. And that was really cool. And I think, at least for me and our hope with a lot of the education work we've been doing around anti-racism and equity, that we can kind of help our neighbors, if they're willing, when they come to the table, to just try and remove themselves from their little bubbles, to try and empathize with what someone else is dealing with. And so I was in the military, and one of the things that I've learned in this time of trying to relate to people who I might think have drastic differences from me is like, if I make the connection with another military person, we start from that point, there's a whole different tone than if I come at you with, this is my political belief. Like, it's just a whole different vibe. And you've created a point of synergy and trust at a certain level because of that connection point that will always supersede the differences. And I think we're losing some of that openness as we've been so dependent on this virtual engagement, as we've been so stuck in our local bubbles for since the culture war started, and it goes back to the founding of the country and before the founding of the country. But anyways, I'm getting deep. turn it over to you both.
No, that's a beautiful. I mean, you're absolutely right. Like the moment we actually take that risk of vulnerability, like there's so much potentially positive payout. Like we could have an actual real connection with someone who, I don't know, on some reasons has no reason to talk to us, but also could fundamentally like impact each other's lives. Like, and it's a risk. I mean, you do have to be vulnerable. You have to reveal something about yourself, but I don't know, hopefully it's worth it.
Yeah. So in your poetry, it seems to me that you and any writer are laying yourself out there, right? In a big way. And there's a vulnerability that you're putting out there. Was there a point at which in your career as a writer where you kind of saw a change in how comfortable you were being vulnerable publicly in that forum? Or was it just kind of one natural progression and there wasn't necessarily an inflection point?
Yeah, there was a kind of self-reckoning that I think has to happen for a lot of writers, especially because the beginning of writing is a very kind of anonymous thing. You know, like even when you're publishing poems, a reader will see the poem and maybe see your name, and that's it. So there's kind of an invisible veil that at least I felt like I could be more honest in that way, just by knowing like they're only they know my name. Like what else is there? But then as you write more, as you give interviews, as you give public readings, I think that it becomes more connected to you as a writer, and you kind of have to own it. If you've been honest in your writing, you have to own like, yeah, I am the actual body that thinks and feels these things. And so it is a process of it's been like a ladder, like a step. Like each time it's like, okay, like I only have to get just a little bit more comfortable being open, being honest. So it hasn't been any huge steps. It's been pretty easy to cope with.
One of the things I really heard this, the symmetry between the vulnerability and the connection making through writing and through libraryship. And you had said sort of that you saw them as connected or not wildly separate. I'm going to misquote you, but I think you know what I'm going. But I heard that as you were talking. And as you know, Nick's talking about the efforts that he's made, the library's made. How do you see, like, so you self-identify as a Latinx writer. How do you see that identity or bringing that identity forward in your writing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And a lot of times I wonder if I didn't openly have Latinx in my bio, would a reader read my poetry and think this is a Latinx poet? And then that leads me a lot to wondering, honestly, just how asinine some designations can be. Because to be Latinx is to be contained, basically it just means that there's a geopolitical assignment to my identity. That I specifically live in America, but some of my family speaks Spanish and comes from countries that speak Spanish. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I get frustrated with the terms that even I use to describe myself, just because Latinx says that there's a border that I believe in is real. Mm-hmm. And when there's other writers, thinking specifically of another Mississippi writer who was a Choctaw writer named Bess Miller Brigham, who described herself as Pan-American, mm-hmm. Really hesitant of any type of language that bordered her own self, that contained other people. So it's a back and forth that I have with myself. Mm-hmm. Like when I know the function of words like Hispanic and Latinx. Sometimes I question the value of what do I get from describing myself in the language of like my historic conquerors. But I also think that it's a chance again that identity can be open and connect with someone else. Right. That they can read my poem, connect with it, and then think, oh my goodness, I just loved a piece of writing from a Latinx person. Who am I? Or like connect with other Latinx people and build community from great distances. So in situations like that, I think it's absolutely worth it.
Yeah, it is constantly a negotiated space. And I think what you're describing is, what am I going to claim and I self-identify as? And I love the language of, I really want to use this language in the language of the conqueror, and I think that is the question, like, how much do I want to keep speaking in the language of the oppressor? Yeah. And, and how does one, navigate, and also recognizing that these spaces or these conversations are here. And, we had a whole conversation in my office recently, with the Office of Human Rights, which is this idea of the collective noun. So, and how, if we talk about a certain type of culture and how limiting that is, like there isn't like one perspective for anybody. And yet we use these collective nouns and to try to get at something. But I think a good question we can all ask ourselves is, what is it that we're exactly trying to get at, and why, and as you said, why is it that we need to do that?
Yeah. And in what ways are we limiting ourselves when we, when we give ourselves such tightly defined barriers? I think that's true in terms like Latinx. I especially think it's true in like gender. We have very solidly confirmed ideas of how we should perform our own body or our own space.
Yeah.
Along those lines, one of the things that I find fascinating about the whole notion of how we choose to operate in a space and a moment in a specific location and context with our identity is the way that varies so dramatic, that can vary dramatically from context to context. So if you're traveling internationally in a country that speaks a different language, or if you are visiting a city that you're not familiar with for the first time versus an area where you're super familiar, and some of this is code switching, but some of it is also to like, wow, I'm presented with a moment in which the person I'm interacting with in a different country, or maybe they're just from a different country, doesn't have that baggage of the United States and our political situation and our cultural divisions. And like, I was on a trip recently, and someone I was talking to didn't assume anything about my identity. And they were like, oh, I didn't know that was your identity, but that's pretty cool. But you also look like you could be from here too. I was like, oh, that's so refreshing that you didn't just make some assumption about who I am. And you allowed me to introduce myself in the way that I wanted to present myself in this moment. And that was certainly that's not the case everywhere or all the time, but that was an interesting moment. With poetry versus other forms of writing, how do you feel that identity plays out differently? So prose versus poetry, for example.
Yeah, so I think that the different genres of writing, I mean, the easy answer is I have no idea. But the little bit that I've experimented myself in other genres, I really like writing plays. And I find that in other genres, I can ask myself the same questions about myself and the place I inhabit. But it's almost as if just the forms of the answer are a little bit different. Like turning a rock over, it's the same thing, but you have a different way of looking at it. And that could be a lot different from other writers that write in a bunch of different genres. And there could be very revealing reasons as to why they write in different genres, because they want to know other things or they want to occupy other identity. But and at least in it's kind of like narcissistic to say, I think, but in my poetry, I can unashamedly take up as much space as myself. Like I'm not expected to perform or be something else. And poetry is a space that I could come into that had no expectations for anything about me. It had no mold for me to fit into, and I think that's why I was drawn to it as like my primary form of writing. Is that I could be Latinx, I could be Southern, I could be someone from Mississippi. Like there was nothing that I had to force myself into. It felt very comfortable around my identity.
So from that comment, it sounds like, and this is going to be overgeneralization, but perhaps with readers of poetry, there's a different level of openness to encountering something completely unfamiliar than someone who's going to have like, oh, I like to read mysteries, or I like to read historical biographies. Like poetry just inherently has this kind of wild range of experience, even if the words are laid out in the same way. Even if it's just a haiku, for example, and even plays have vast differences once you add the production elements. But is that something that you see and hear from with your readers, that, or just that you sense that there's a difference in the way that people are approaching poetry versus other genres, or is it more about how you approach the writing differently for one genre or another?
I will say that a lot of the fiction and essay I've read recently, how it occupies the eye, the perspective, feels a little bit closer to how I would expect the perspective in poetry. But I'm not sure. Like I know for a fact that poetry is a lot older than a lot of other form. That the drama as an element came from poetry, when poetry branched to being primarily on the page. That the novel, at least in the Western tradition, is a product of like the early 15th, 16th centuries. But honestly, I have no idea. I wish I had a good answer for you.
That was a good answer, I thought.
Okay, I will say for anybody who is watching and has any questions for CT, please type them into the chat wherever you are, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We will make sure that CT sees them, and we'll try to get everything answered that you send us. I actually had a question, but by saying all of that, it's completely out of my head. Oh, I'm going to steal Nick's question. I have a question from Nick that I'm going to get. So, and I don't think you've asked us already, Nick, so stop me if you have. But it's to do with the religious imagery in your work. And I'm so sorry, CT, because now I'm a little bit afraid we've already talked about this. But just that there's so much, and we see this in there's a poem of yours that I read ages ago, and I'm going to get the name wrong, but it was Saint Ramo, and it's like the 2-column, which is just absolutely one of the most amazing poems I've ever seen. And if you have a link where people can read that on the web, if you can type it in the private chat, we will share it. It's got to be the most breathtaking poem I've ever seen. But if that's a print publication. I don't think it ever appeared online. Okay, so it is somewhere that people can look at if they. So I was just going to ask about the religion in your work.
As far as religious imagery, like I think it's part of my language. So like I grew up in a household with a Southern Baptist mother and a Latino Catholic father. So the language of the Bible, and especially the King James language, is just so much a part of like Southern language to me. And it's just part of like, there's forever a back section of my head that is just quoting Bible endlessly, probably. It'd be terrifying to get like an MRI of my brain and like to see that little thing going. But like, it's part of my natural tendency, not just in poetry but in language, that I rely a lot on the King James language, because I think it's something. And I find myself too, like when I read with specifically audiences in Mississippi, I find that there's less that I'm trying to explain to the audience between poems. Like I feel like at least I want to write in a language that's common to my community, to us. So I don't know. I'm not incredibly like pious myself, but it's definitely a language that I just go to no matter what.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like it permeates both the house in which you grew up, but also the communities in which you live.
For sure, yeah. It's part of not just my everyday language, but the language of the community I know.
Yeah.
So how did you come up with poetry? Like, were there certain poets whose work you were exposed to, that you read, that you discovered along the way, that you just went, aha? And this is a total leading question to my wanting to know more about your love for June Jordan, which comes through in some of your writing. And I'm a big June Jordan fan too. So
that's awesome to hear. Yeah, so I was actually pretty late to reading and writing poetry compared to like some writers that I'm good friends with who have been reading and writing since they were kids. I didn't start writing creatively until I was in college. Like I saw that there was a creative writing class and that you could take for like college credit. I was like, you can do that. But the first poets that I read that I really liked were actually the Romantics. So like William Blake and John Keats. And then immediately after that, let me think. It was definitely like the English Romantics for like a solid few years. And then through a creative writing class, through being exposed to more contemporary writers, I've really, really especially loved like and I'm still actively learning about them, but the Black modernists, the Black arts movement, so like Jean Jordan, Gwendolyn Brooks, Lucille Clifton is like I think Lucille Clifton is just the best writer from America, period. Like I think that she is the preeminent American poet forever. But yeah, I think that probably every writer has their own little lineage that they have to chart. And for me, it actually didn't start with other Southern poets or other Latinx poets, but kind of in a roundabout way where I didn't get to know the work of Southern poets or other Latinx poets until very recently, like a few years ago, probably.
So you have a new collection coming out in 2022. Can you tell us, I know we're kind of running out of time here, but we want to hear about what's coming, when we can look for it. And also, there's a lot of questions, but what's the unifying piece of this new collection?
Yeah. So the book is Headless, John the Baptist Hitchhiking, and it's coming from Acre Books, which is based out of University of Cincinnati. And every book of poetry they publish is just phenomenal. They're a great team. I loved them immediately, so I was very, very happy when they wanted to publish a manuscript. But as far as what that book is about, it's the book that I've been writing the longest out of any other book that I've had come out. So it's a poetry collection that is 6 or 7 years in the making. It's for a little bit I thought I was used to having books come out, but this book has been such a labor and such a time for me that I'm nervous again to have a book come out because it's just I put so much into this one that I'm just really, really connected to it.
When is it? What month it's 2022? When abouts in 2022? Did you say?
Early spring.
So
February or March. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to it. And I mean, your work, as I've said before, is so stunning. And I put in the chat for people who are listening. I put actually I didn't put in the chat. I ran across the top of the screen where you can learn more about CT and his work. But we'll make sure we put that in the chat. Get his website there for you. And from that website, you can also look at CT links to various work that he has published on the web. And so we invite you to learn more about him and also get his collections. We put some links in where you can buy this collection, American Cavewall Sonnets, that we've been talking about a lot tonight. So please check the links in every place that you're watching. And Nick, I think we have time for a quick question if you have one to close us out here.
Oh man, I've always got questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, just first off, thank you so much, CT. This has been really lovely conversation, and grateful to Kyla for bringing your work to our lives here in Prince George's County, and to be able to kind of start to get to know you through your writing and continue the journey. Once you're in our extended family of virtual events here, you're stuck with us. So we'll have you back in 2022, and we'll look forward to checking out that new collection. So, okay, this is going to be a heavy question. Maybe could be light. Let's see. We'll throw it out. If you are in librarian role and someone comes up to you and says, "I just haven't been able to get into poetry yet," what are your suggestions for getting into it? And is there a poet to start with, or is there a type of poetry to start with, or should I connect with poetry that's about a topic that I'm interested in? What would your response be in that reference interview context?
Okay, yes. All right. So, such a good question. There would be a million follow-up questions, but regardless of what the follow-up questions would be, like I would have like probably 5 things. And I would first and foremost, it would be the collected poetry of Lucille Clifton. Just because I would tell them it's a big book, but you can open it anywhere and just read, and you'll be blown away. So like, you don't have to read it in order. You don't have to try and read the whole thing. Just keep it on your coffee table, and when you're bored, just open it. Guillotine, which is Eduardo Corral's second book of poems. It was published last year, 2020. Guillotine is just a phenomenal collection. It's a short, brief thing, but Eduardo Corral is just one of my like patron saints. His first book, Slow Lightning, is just part of my New Testament. Like, let's see who else. Shallcross by C.D. Wright, for sure. That was C.D. Wright's 2016 poetry collection, and it's one of my favorites of hers. It's the first collection I read from her, and it's remained my favorite. Let's see what else.
Okay, I'm gonna have the annoying follow-up patron question of, but I just read it and I just can't understand what they're saying, and I prefer mysteries. Help me.
I would say read it, but read it out loud. That's always my biggest advice for myself too. There's a lot that I don't understand until I read it out loud, because the ear is really smart, and the ear understands way more than we give it credit for. So just read it out loud, and then don't be so focused on getting it, but be focused on what the language can do you, like how you feel when you read it, like how does it sound when you say it, what does it remind you of, but also to find poets from your community. You'll always have a better connection with a poet that you share a home with, for a million reasons. I mean, they write in a language that's meant for you. You'll be familiar with their descriptions, with their places. A few years ago, in special collections at MSU, I found a little collection by a poet named Sam Prestridge, and I read the whole thing sitting in the archives, and I was just blown away by it, because this is a phenomenal little book. And then I got to the bio, and he's from Columbus, Mississippi. He lives in Georgia now. I emailed him, and we've been emailing back and forth ever since. But but I mean, that before I even knew that he was literally from the same town as me, I just thought that he was some poet. I was like, oh, everything he says makes sense.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for your advice for everyone who's tuning in. I think you put it very brilliantly, and yeah, that was delightful. There's something about poetry too, like the act of sitting and trying to digest the words. And I think the way you phrase that as, it's the experience of encountering that's the goal. It's not trying to come away with some specific understanding. That's really important. I think that we don't necessarily get taught that in the average English class, but it's an important lesson. So Cool. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for answering my zany questions, and thank you just to Kyla for having questions that were sensible. And this has been really wonderful. We invite everyone to support CT by checking him out on social media, and we'll put those handles back up here, Twitter and Instagram. Follow the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights at PGCOHR on Twitter and at PGC Human Rights on Instagram. Follow the library at PGCMLS everywhere. Great way to support a poet like CT is to order a copy of their works, such as 40 Stitches Sewing Body, which is also available on Kindle, FYI, everyone. And check out American Cavewall Sonnets. And if you want to dabble before your book arrives, check out CT's website. You can read several of CT's works on there, that some of which have been included in the publications, and I believe there's others that have not been. We have a huge amount of events coming up. There are so many that I cannot even fathom where to start with listing them. However, I'm going to plug one very important one that's coming up as part of our Hispanic Heritage Month commemoration. That is Wednesday, October 6th at 7 p.m. We have a very special guest who, like Kyla and I, are just beside ourselves that we have this guest. And props to Kyla on the booking. It was all her. And we have the one and only Dolores Huerta joining us for our keynote event. And she'll be in conversation with County Executive Angela Alston-Brooks. And for anyone who does not know who Dolores Huerta is, you learned about her in your textbooks. You might forget that you learned about her, but she is like one of the handful, one or two Latin women who is ever mentioned in standard U.S. history textbooks. And given that our history is taught so poorly generally, that says a lot that she's in there despite the inequities with that. And she is one of the civil rights leaders of the last 100 years in this country, who has influenced the daily lives of all of us, whether we realize it or not. So this is a huge deal. Save the date, October 6th, 7 p.m. It will be available on demand afterwards. And we hope you can join us for that joint presentation with the Office of Human Rights. Thank you, CT. Thank you, Kyla. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Be safe. Please get vaccinated if you have not been. And if not, get tested frequently, because it's a wild world right now that we're living in, and we want you all to stay safe so you can come back for more events. And if you're tuning in from outside of the area, please know that you can get a free virtual library card with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. It's our website, pgcmls.info. We have the best ebook, e-audiobook collection in the darn DMV region, and the shortest wait times on the high demand titles. So check us out, use the collection. County residents, you're investing in this collection, please use it. It's a good thing to do. Okie doke. Good night, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you.
Bye.